Happy Monday, all you Minties! This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, and join me today for an advanced look at the Spider-Man by Roger Stern Omnibus from Marvel Comics. I'll also be doing a comparison to the original printing, so let's get started. Before getting started, a huge thank you to David Gabriel and the fine folks at Marvel for sending us an advanced copy of this omnibus. This omnibus is due out in the direct market on April 14th, and then a couple of weeks later in the book market. So what we're looking at here is the standard edition cover to this omnibus. There is a direct market cover, and that's on your left-hand side there. So this again is the standard edition cover, while the direct market cover is on your left. Now, this omnibus had been previously released in 2014. This is the second printing of it. So of course I'm going to do a comparison to the original printing. This here is my copy and this is the new printing. So the cover looks a little bit darker than the original printing. Could just be my copy, but other than that, no difference at all. And here's what the spines look like together. I'm not sure if it's the angle or what, but the one on the right, the new printing, actually looks thicker than the original printing. Most of the time they're slimmer, but from this angle it looks like the new printing is just a little bit thicker. The image of Spider-Man down at the bottom is certainly bigger in the new printing than the original printing. And this is thick, boy. This is thicker than a Snicker. Here's what both backs look like. So it's a little bit different. The font up at the top is a little bit different, still the same quote. And then down at the bottom is what it collects. The ISBN has now been moved to the right. And it looks like the artwork is bigger in the new printing, the artwork of the covers. Both books retail for $125. We'll do a comparison of the pages here in a little bit, but let's look under the dust jacket first. Wow, they both look the same. The image of Spider-Man is bigger, just like in the dust jacket spine, and nothing but black on the back. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this book on the inside. We'll be doing a comparison, the internal artwork here in a little bit. Here's what the bookend pages look like. The image of Spider-Man jumping off the page, the logo of Spider-Man, and the image here of his fight with the Hobgoblin. And Hobgoblin, of course, is one of the biggest stories in this particular collection. All the credits here from Roger Stern, John Romita Jr., Steve Mitchell, all the colorists, all the contents here. There's a wonderful introduction by Roger Stern. It's the same one that he wrote for the 2014 printing. And it talks about how he was a fan of Spider-Man, grew up finding Spider-Man at I think it was like a drugstore, and then had to go back and get several issues of that he missed. And he grew up being a fan of Peter Parker because he looked like Peter Parker growing up. And I think this is wonderful right here. This is something, as a matter of fact, this is when I found out that my favorite letterer growing up had passed away. So this is really cool. He says, even though the name of the omnibus is called Spider-Man by Roger Stern, there's so many people behind this book. And I find that so humbling. Uncle Rog is such a nice guy. He talks about all the people that helped him write different issues. As a matter of fact, he talked about, at the beginning here, if I remember correctly, how he missed Dennis O'Neil was taking over Amazing Spider-Man, and he was writing with issue 207. 205 was written by David Michelinie, but they needed a wrap-up issue, so that's kind of his first gig on Amazing Spider-Man. Was Roger Stern was writing issue 206, and it was all put together in a couple of weeks with John Byrne and a couple of other inkers and writer, or inkers and colorist. But back here, he just goes on to thank all the other people that were involved in this, all the people that asked him to join the Spider-Man family here, all the people that he worked with, like Mary Severin, John Byrne, Tom DeFalco, Jim Shooter, John Romita Jr., Carmela Merlo, and of course the people that made him a fan, Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and John Romita Sr. I love that that's in parentheses. And then all the people that have passed away. And I remember reading this when I first got the omnibus in 2014, and that's when I found out that Joe Rosen had passed away. I had no idea that he had gone. He was my favorite letterer growing up. I had no clue how he would get so many small little words into a panel. But here we are with Uncle Roger's first Spider-Man title, and that is Spectacular Spider-Man 43. So this collects Spectacular Spider-Man 43 to 61 and number 85, Amazing Spider-Man 206. As I mentioned, that was his little fill-in issue, which is actually the second issue of Spider-Man that he wrote. Let's look at that. Yeah, this one right here. And I said John Byrne drew it. And then 224 to 252, and the annual 16 and 17. Plus, it's got material from annual 15, Spectacular Spider-Man annual number 3, Web of Spider-Man annual number 3, and then What If 34. This is a big book. It is 1,296 pages. So you're looking at almost 1,300 pages of material. 4 years of the life of Roger Stern writing Spider-Man. And if you've not read this, you are in for a treat. I try to step back when I do these overviews because this is just an overview of the book, so people can look at the artwork and people can, look at the build of the book. And I try not to put myself in there, but sometimes I can't help it. You all know I can't help it sometimes. If a story means something to me, or regarded as my favorite Spider-Man Omnibus, because this is my favorite Spider-Man Omnibus. Well, not this one. I'll be giving this one away at a later giveaway, but the original one that I have. Like, when people ask me, what's the best Spider-Man Omnibus? For me, growing up in the 80s, of course, Uncle Roger's Spider-Man is the best Spider-Man. Because you get so much, you get such a variety of stories in here. Towards the beginning of his Spectacular Spider-Man run, he kind of gets a hang of the character. He starts using the Vulture. It's funny, it's quirky, and you get to see Spider-Man, Peter Parker, just act a lot different than the previous writers did. Now, you couldn't find a ongoing artist for him to join him on Spectacular Spider-Man, so there are several artists that he worked with on here. But by the time he gets into Amazing Spider-Man, that's when him and John Romita Jr. teamed up. And John Romita Jr. was a busy guy back then because he was also drawing issues of Uncanny X-Men. But this is, like I said, 4 years of the life of Roger Stern writing Spider-Man. So to put things into a perspective, this was from 1980 to 1984, the same years that Marvel was getting Daredevil by Frank Miller. Walter Simonson was starting to work on Thor, and John Byrne took over the Fantastic Four. So for a lot of people, this was it. This was the highlight of their favorite characters being written and drawn by their favorite creators. And Roger Stern was the first of his kind. He was a fan that grew up reading Spider-Man that eventually became the writer on Spider-Man. He wasn't a guy working as an editor at first and just knew of the stories because Stan Lee was writing them, but he grew up reading them as a kid and then eventually got a job at Marvel as an editor. And it's all at the beginning. I can't remember exactly how he got, I think he was an assistant editor. But anyway, eventually became the writer of Amazing Spider-Man. Now, as I was saying towards the beginning, the stories are quirky, they're funny. He's trying to get a hang of the character, and he does. He captures Peter Parker's voice. He gives him that Parker look, as a lot of writers like to use these days. And then by the time he takes over Amazing Spider-Man, it's just its own thing. It's become its own beast. It's wonderful to read, and it's a book that I remember in collected edition, because I had some of the trades and I had the single issues, but I just couldn't put down. Anytime I did a Spider-Man reading binge, I would always be able to get out the issues, and I knew I went ahead and get out like 24 issues because I knew it would be back-to-back, cover-to-cover reading every single time I reread those issues. Hey, Moonstone. But we have the return of Black Cat. We do have some returning villains, but he liked to introduce new villains like that Spider-Man had never fought, like Nitro, Will-O-Wisp. But we do have the Vulture, which is his favorite villain. We have him fighting this phenomenal story. By the time, honestly, that you get to the Juggernaut story in here, this is where it becomes a book that you can't put down. At least in my opinion. As of issue 228, 229, it's a comic that I could not put down, and it's a page turner because one thing leads into another. And then all this, of course, leads into the Hobgoblin saga. We don't know the identity of the Hobgoblin. We don't know where he came from, if he's related to the original Green Goblin, how he got those powers. And it's a whole mystery. And I love that, sadly, it was such a mystery that it didn't really get wrapped up until a few decades later as to the true identity of the Hobgoblin. That he's just a guy lurking in the shadows at first, and then he looks a lot different than the Green Goblin. And by a lot different, I mean his color palettes are different. I wonder if there was ever a time that they wanted to use the original Green Goblin colors for the Hobgoblin. All the later pages are included in here, so you get to go back and relive those moments as people are first shocked about the Hobgoblin or the Juggernaut story. And of course his favorite villain, the Vulture, makes a return. But you all know the story that I always talk about here. This is a comic book that helped shape who I am. And that is in issue 248. Amazing Spider-Man 248. Not that. Not that. That. And it is the kid who collected Spider-Man. Now, that's in the other half of this issue. First, we have John Romita Jr. drawing this fight against Thunderball. But in the back, we have this kid that collected Spider-Man. It's drawn by Ron Frenz. Of course, Roger Stern wrote it. He had this idea. Yeah, this one here. I'm not going to give it away, but this one, whew, man. Manly eye sweat every time I read it. You can find out for yourself what that's about. And then we get to the end of his run. Uncle Raj decides to leave with John Romita Jr. in his plot for issue 251 and 252 stay. And of course, Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz take over the book. Now, 252 is the classic cover where Spider-Man, but I cannot not talk about this cover right here. Holy crap. I remember as a kid, I was like, is that painted? That looks so epic. This has to be the big showdown between Spider-Man and the Hobgoblin. I had a hard time finding that one at a comic shop. And like I said, those storylines later got wrapped up in the Hobgoblin Lives miniseries. This famous cover right here. Spider-Man coming back from his Secret Wars adventure with a whole new costume. And, of course, most of us know what this costume will become eventually. But this is in issue 252. Like I said, Roger Stern wrote the plot, but by now Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz were taking over the book. And this is where the book ends. And then in the back, so we get all these extras in the back. These were original pinups in the back of annuals. But here we have Peter Parker's apartment layout. We have his villains. We have a Aunt May's photo album. This is from Spectacular Spider-Man Annual 3. So whenever it says collecting material from, it's just little couple pages from those annuals. The Office. Very cool. Pete's Pals and Gals. Man, this must have been, when these issues were coming out, this must have been a hell of a time to be reading comic books. I didn't get these until much later, because X-Men was my life, but I wasn't getting these until they were already long gone, and I had to get them from comic book shops, or flea markets, or yard sales, or trading comics with other friends. The Wraith. And so I think this is part of the What If thing. Yeah. Spectacular Spider-Man original artwork, and then this is some of the designs here for Spider-Man's new alien costume, what could have been. And Marvel Tales. Marvel Tales, of course, were reprints of the original issues with a brand new cover, drawn by different artists. And here are some trade paperback covers. I remember having that one in the early 90s, or late 90s. Marvel Visionaries, Roger Stern, more trade paperbacks, Marvel Premiere, and more trades. Now, let's look at this binding and do a comparison. So the book has 1,296 pages. Here is what the eye looks like. And you could probably tell as I was flipping through here, it was laying down pretty good. But, like I always like to do if I have the original printing, let's do a comparison to the original printing. Okay, up at the top we have the original printing, and at the bottom we have the new printing. And I was right. The paper quality is a little bit thicker in the new printing. That's what made it look thicker on the spine. Not by much, but I could feel it just because I got them side by side here. As far as the colors, they look identical. Everything else looks the same. The proportions of the frames around the panel, or I'm sorry, around the cover, they all look identical. I was trying to find different colors, but it looks like the new printing has a little more vibrant colors down here at the bottom. Now, it could be because mine has been read several times up at the top from 2014. And just flipping through the next page, and just a little bit, yeah. They seem to be a little darker and a little more vibrant than the original colors. Not by much. Just showcasing how each of the books lay over. The eye on the original printing is a little bit bigger than the eye on this one. So, even though there's really no gutter loss, if there were any spread pages, you'd be seeing a little more gutter loss in the new printing than the original printing. Now, both of them were printed at the R. Donnelly printer, but like I said, 2014 and then 2021. Just looking at some of my favorite covers and reminiscing, exact same thing. Coloring looks identical. So it's just in some pages that the colors look a little more vibrant in the new printing. And then how the book is laying over towards the end. Now let's look at the extras. So in the original printing, it doesn't lay over as nice as the newer printing. So we're looking at the very last page of the book before we get to the end page. Seems a little bit darker up here on the reproduction of the trade paperback scans than down here. So we've done a comparison between this and the original printing, and honestly, this printing, thicker paper, it lays over really nice. My favorite Spider-Man omnibus. For those of you wondering or on the fence, do yourself a favor. You're in for a treat if you've never read this stuff. And if you have read it, maybe it's time to revisit. The only other thing I noticed that in the new printing that they're doing, or they did, was give you this right here. The comics are presented as originally created. They may contain outdated depictions. Because I really don't recall what in here could have made them put that. It's not really a warning. It's just letting you know that none of the material has been changed, which is exactly what I want to see. I don't want to see any of the material change. I want it to be done in the way that it was originally written and drawn. So maybe that's just me. But yeah, this is a must. Go and get it if you don't own it already. But that, as they say, is that. If you're interested in purchasing this book, don't forget to check out our sponsor, CheapGraphicNovels.com, your online source for collected editions up to 50% off retail price. Cheap Graphic Novels prides itself on excellent packaging, so your stuff gets to you in excellent condition, and they have amazing customer service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And for all you Minties that are watching, if you're a first-time customer, don't forget to mention that Near Mint Condition sent you their way for a promotional credit on free shipping on your next order. Now, this is only for U.S. customers. CheapGraphicNovels.com, your source for the hottest books with deep discounts, customer service, and excellent shipping that will keep you coming back for more. And that was the content, the page count, and the build of this omnibus. Let me know in the comments down below if you're picking this up. If you're going into this omnibus blind, you've never read any of the stuff, you've just heard about Roger Stern's run on Spider-Man. If you had the trade paperbacks, if you missed the original printing, or if you have the original printing, what you thought of this particular omnibus. This was the Uncanny Omar. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit that like, subscribe button. We can be found on Spreadshop and on Patreon. Amazing ways to support the channel if you can do so. Both of those links can be found in the description of this video. More importantly, please everybody, stay healthy, stay safe, and much love.